What's up, everybody? Welcome back to the latest edition of the Respectfully Show. I am your host, Cam Farmer. And today, man, let's just get right into this. I want to talk about a subject that has sports media, social media, the whole nine, all of it, it has it buzzing. Uh, I want to talk about Chris Paul. I want to talk about Chris Paul's sudden departure from the Los Angeles Clippers. Uh, Before I get into my own personal opinion, my own takes as to what I think happened, I want to provide a disclaimer to all of you. I feel like as a journalist, I do owe that to whomever tunes into this video. Um, as a disclaimer regarding regarding Chris Paul, it was very important for me to stay away from athlete center podcasts. It was very important for me to stay away from social media. And the reason why it is, or it was rather, important for me to stay away from that is because I don't think I would have been able to formulate my own opinions about the Chris Paul / Clippers severed partnership. When it comes to athlete generated content, I stayed away from it not because the athletes themselves weren't credible. It was because they were emotional. These athletes played with Chris Paul, played against Chris Paul, have personal relationships with Chris Paul. And as a Kawhi Leonard fan, by default, a Clippers fan, it could be so easy for me to not want to see the bigger picture, for which I don't think the decision to send Chris Paul away was made overnight. It can be so easy to not want to do my own research because I may or not see a couple of tweets that I agree with. I didn't want to display confirmation bias because I'm looking for content / agreeing with content that validates my already preconceived notions about the situation with Chris Paul. So if I see a random Twitter user or an NBA player on a podcast talking about how dare the Clippers do this, how dare you treat Chris Paul like this, it would have been so easy for me to hop on here and utter those same sentiments. But I feel like I would have done a disservice to each of you if I didn't go back, read some articles from credible journalists, and come up with a well-informed opinion so that I could impart that to you all. My point is, I know some of you don't like the Clippers because you are a diehard Lakers fan, or some of you don't like the Clippers because that you just don't like them and you already have these notions about them that this situation is only going to validate more. What I would encourage you with is be open-minded. I'm not sitting here and telling you that I 100% agree with the situation as well, but be open-minded. Don't just get your information from former athletes who are on podcasts. read these articles, listen to journalist-led podcasts that is centered around the Chris Paul situation. Don't limit yourself to just athlete generated content, because at the same time, when the news broke, they also became emotional because they are close and they have relationships with Chris Paul, which is not a bad thing. But I also encourage some of you to look deeper in this situation regarding, hmm, why did Lawrence Frank and the Clippers part ways with Chris Paul, seeing that this was sort of his retirement tour? Why? Instead of hurling false information that puts either Chris Paul or the Clippers in a negative light, if that makes sense. And I know the Clippers, to some of you, are beyond being in a positive light right now. Or let me rephrase. I know the Clippers, to some of you, they're not gonna get your grace. They're not gonna get your patience because this is like an unwritten law that was broken to some of you. And that's okay. But before some of you start hurling, again, false information, please do your research and please learn both sides of the situation. Having said all of that, I want to give you all my honest opinion as to what I believe and what I think contributed to Chris Paul's sudden departure. In regards to Chris Paul, we have to understand a couple of things. That the tension between CP and the organization, it had been building for over the early portions of the season. We also have to remember that Chris Paul is not only not playing, he also does not like to lose. He's on record for that multiple times. Lawrence Frank's decision to part ways with Chris Paul, it was made after the Heat game on Sunday night. And Lawrence Frank respected Chris Paul enough to hop on a jet from Los Angeles to Atlanta to meet with Chris Paul face to face instead of texting Chris Paul and being like, hey, yo, like, we just gonna trade you. So this narrative of Lawrence Frank deserves Nico Harrison treatment, no. Because unlike Lawrence Frank, Nico Harrison didn't have the courage nor the respect to tell Luka Doncic that he was being traded to his face and proceeded to trade him before he let Luka Doncic know over text. The meeting allegedly lasted 3 hours. 3 hours. I can tell that there was some emotions in that meeting. Chris Paul joined the Clippers with the understanding of two things. Number one, he's not going to be playing as much. And number two, that his course leadership style would have needed to be in check. It needed to have been reined in. If anybody knows Chris Paul, it's Lawrence Frank. Lawrence Frank was an assistant coach to Chris Paul from 2014 to 2016 under Doc Rivers. Lawrence Frank knows the leadership style of Chris Paul. There's a reason why the Clippers organization wanted Chris Paul to rein it in. The Clippers are having a very, very bad season. Historically bad, if I might add. As the team struggled, Chris Paul's alleged abrasive methods, it got him into a heated argument with an assistant coach, allegedly. What? You get into it with a coach. And Chris Paul was very visibly frustrated with the team's loss that they endured in Miami. And I just want to say that if you're getting into it with an assistant coach, on top of you not being on speaking terms with the head coach for several weeks, there are a lot of flags and questions that I raise with that. What could have happened to where Ty Lue and CP didn't talk for several weeks? On top of allegedly getting into it with an assistant coach. Off rip, if those things are true, now this situation is deeper than anticipated. But the Clippers knew what they were getting themselves into when bringing Chris Paul back. That's why they told him to rein the leadership in, keep it in check. Because it became unbearable dealing with loss after loss and having to deal with the abrasive leadership style of Chris Paul in the locker room. Now, Shams Charania reported that the team let go of Chris Paul after Chris Paul was holding them accountable. A player of Chris Paul's stature, you're not sent away from a team for holding players and coaches and front office execs and ownership. You're not sent away for holding them accountable. Mm-mm. Chris Paul has been in the league for over 20 years. I'm sure he's held every coaching staff, front office exec, teammate, coach, owner, every team he's been a part of, I'm sure Chris Paul has held them accountable. Chris Paul did not get sent home, in my opinion, because he was holding people accountable. You have accountability and you have disrespect. I suspect that certain lines were crossed that should not have been crossed in the first place. As much as we praise Chris Paul for his IQ, for his leadership, for what he does in statistically making a basketball team better, there is also another layer to Chris Paul where, respectfully, he is a rage baiter. He knows how to get under people's skin. Do I need to bring up what happened with Rajon Rondo? Patrick Beverly? Chris Paul? I mean, even DeMarcus Cousins. Chris Paul is not a bad teammate. He's not a bad player, but he has kind of developed a reputation for rage baiting. And at some point in time, like we have seen from Pat Bev and Rondo and Cousins and many more, a lot of people ain't gonna want to put up with that as long as you may think they want to. Which is why I believe the Clippers made the difficult decision to do what needed to be done. I do not believe that this is deep. I believe that this is deeper than what is being reported. That is my personal and humble and honest opinion. I love Chris Paul. Chris Paul, to me, is the greatest point guard, greatest true point guard of my lifetime. But I suspect that a line was crossed. And Lawrence Frank and the Clippers brass, they made a statement. And that statement was nobody is bigger than the organization. Oh, how dare you do this to Chris Paul? How dare Chris Paul suffer this? This is why it's very important to do research. Lawrence Frank, again, Lawrence Frank would not have made this decision, nor respected Chris Paul enough to come hop on a jet and fly to Chris Paul to have a meeting with him. We can say what we want to about Lawrence Frank, but Lawrence Frank respects Chris Paul. He respected Chris Paul so much that he decided to hop on a plane and have a meeting to his face. I see guys like Stephen A. Smith saying that Chris Paul or Lawrence Frank did this to Chris Paul on purpose. He respects the dude so much that he wanted to have a meeting to his face. He didn't have to do that. But I believe a line was crossed. Those are just my 2 cents, ladies and gentlemen. Those are just my 2 cents, man. It's very, it's very, very important, man. And I don't even want to come on this platform and say this stuff, but I feel like it is my duty to do that. And I am not saying, that's why I always said allegedly. I'm not saying that this definitively happened. But isn't it rather odd that Chris Paul went several weeks without talking to Ty Lue? That Chris Paul allegedly got into an altercation with with an assistant coach? It's very odd. But all I ask of each and every one of you who sees this to ask yourselves, why? Why? Not why did the Clippers trade or waive Chris Paul? But why would Lawrence Frank make this decision? Because when it is reported that Chris Paul was sent home, when Chris Paul posted on his Instagram, just got found out that I was sent home. When you are sent home, that is right. That is rhetoric that aligns with an educator sending home a little kid because he wasn't acting right in the classroom. Sent home. Little kids get sent home from daycare, from class because they're not doing what they're supposed to be doing. Why would Chris Paul get sent home? Because of what I already suspect. I suspect that a line was crossed. But that's it for me, ladies and gentlemen. I pray you all have a great rest of your night, great rest of your day. Stay safe. God bless you. Love.